Welcome to Booked, where two guys tell you about the books they're reading. I'm Livia Snedden.
And I'm Rob Olson. Tonight we actually will be reviewing Demon Theory by Stephen Graham Jones. We've been promising it for a while now, and we had to kind of delay a little bit because, as it turns out, it's a little bit of a complicated book to read, so we need a little extra time. Not like Haruki Murakami 1Q84 amount of time, but still extra time. What is of note is I want to welcome Misty Bennett on. She is the one who chose this through Patreon for us to review, and she's joining us to talk about the book. So, Misty, welcome.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Little bit of housekeeping before we get going, just in case. Because, Rob, I imagine there are some people who only listen to a few minutes of this podcast and then turn it off.
What? That can't be.
I don't know if we can see a statistic on it. I'd rather not. But anyway,
I don't look at that.
The fact that we're reviewing a Stephen Graham Jones book is probably in line with this next comment. It's Craig Clevenger's birthday today.
Happy birthday, Craig Clevenger.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, so the day we're recording this, not the day you hear it, because I imagine this is going to require clever editing. It will take Rob a little bit to get it out to you. But, we'll continue our tradition of recording on holidays. I think Clevenger's birthday is a holiday. At least around these parts.
Definitely around these parts.
So we're going to start off, I think, by having Misty tell us why she selected this particular book for us to read. That would probably be a good place for us to start.
Absolutely. I, number one, know that you guys are huge fans of Stephen Graham Jones, as I am. He's one of those pivotal authors in my life that after I got out of college and discovered how much was actually out there, he's one of the pillars in my life as far as writers go. And anything that he puts out, I'm going to gravitate towards. But I knew you guys had not read all of the backlog, like some of his older work. And this is a pretty big book as far as like really showing the cleverness of Stephen. And so I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to take a bite into it.
Did you take a bite out of it, Livius? Oh, no, you read it electronically.
Yes, I did. I did, but I will tell you, the corner of my iPad is a little chewed up after getting through this book, which I'm sure we'll talk about at length. I don't know if anybody listening to the show needs to hear a Stephen Graham Jones bio. Here it is. I looked at it on the screen. I was like, I could probably do this one without looking at it. But here it is. Born and raised in Texas, in Boulder, Colorado now, 45, Blackfeet, into werewolves and slashers and zombies. Would wear pirate shirts a lot if I could find them, and probably carry some kind of sword.
He's probably not 45 anymore, I'm guessing.
No, I don't think he is, yeah.
So before I dip into the synopsis, as Misty mentioned, we are big fans of Stephen Graham Jones, so I'll just mention the stuff that we've reviewed on the podcast, and this is not necessarily chronological order, but Zombie Bake Off, The Last Final Girl, Zombie Sharks with Metal Teeth, The Least of My Scars, Not for Nothing, The Elvis Room, Mongrels, and then we also talked about stories that he had in Warmed and Bound, obviously, and that New Black anthology, and I'm sure we had to talk about The Night Cyclist on the podcast. It had to have happened.
I know I talked about it because I really, quite honestly, it's my favorite work of his to date that I've read. Yeah.
That's big. So that's a spoiler for what might come later on in the episode. Here's the synopsis for Demon Theory. A psychological tale of cinematic horror. On Halloween night, following an unnerving phone call from his diabetic mother, Hale and 6 of his med school classmates return to the house where his sister disappeared years ago. While there is no sign of his mother, something is waiting for them there, and has been waiting for a long time. Written as a literary film treatment littered with footnotes and obscure nuances, Demon Theory is even parts camp and terror, combining glib dialogue, fascinating pop culture references, and an intricate subtext as it pursues the events of a haunting movie trilogy too real to dismiss. There are books about movies and movies about books, and then there's Demon Theory, a refreshing and occasionally shocking addition to the increasingly popular intelligent horror genre. And I want to say intelligent horror is in quotes for some reason.
I've never heard that term before, though.
Intelligent horror. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, That is a weird. That was definitely the publisher put that in because you know what I'm saying. Like, I don't know. Do you want any thoughts on the synopsis, Livius?
I think it's a start.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that.
I don't. Yeah, I mean that is the very literal tip of the iceberg as far as this book goes. One update: Stephen is 46, or no? Well, I guess I take that back. He could potentially be 46. He's born in 72, the same year I am. So the chances of him being 46 are growing by the day.
All right, so that's a pretty fresh bio. I thought. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, that's good. Good to know.
So yeah, this is the literal, as I said, tip of the iceberg. This book is it's written to be like a movie treatment that is based on a book, which is based on some case notes from a psychiatrist. So there have been a lot of transitions in this story. So we have whatever happened initially, then we have whatever that got written into actual case notes, then transcribed into book form, and then made into a movie. So this may have lost, like a game of telephone, may have lost some of its authenticity along the way.
That's fair.
Yeah. So like Livia says, it is written, the book is written as if it's movie action, but it's not written like a script. It's very much a narrative that uses movie terminology, but otherwise it's written just like a book, I guess. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. But they use movie terms like on screen, off screen, voiceover, things like that, in the shorthand that you may use, at least in reference to like movies in general. But it's very much, a regular narrative with paragraphs and like, people talking in quotes and stuff like that. But the other interesting thing about this book is all the footnotes, which happen as well. It's known for having a slew of footnotes, not necessarily like House of Leaves deep, but consistently throughout the book in a way that like we could talk about whether it enhances or the story or not. But footnotes are a big part of this too.
A big enough part that there are well over 500 of them in the course of a 440. You guys have the actual book, right? 440 pages. Is that? Yeah.
Accurate.
So more than one per page, if you count sub footnotes. The footnotes, though, do bring some clarity, as Rob kind of mentioned. A few of them are very functional in that, if it says EXT, there's a footnote explaining that that's exterior shot, that type of thing. So there is some actual movie jargon in there. And the remainder of them really kind of point to where reference material, right? So where in a movie, most specifically, because I did notice, and we talked about it a little bit. I guess we'll talk about spoiler talk in a little while and how we did this, but he always referenced the movie, even if he mentioned the book the movie was based on. So they are all movie related, I think. And I'm not going to go back and thumb through 400 of them, but I do believe that all of them reference another movie or movie jargon, not true life events or actual places. They're all movie related.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate, with the exception.
I'm gonna agree.
Yeah, there may be some like historical fact thrown in there somewhere, or like a medical term or something, but for the most part, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Well, even so, just to get a little bit specific, there's a reference to Michael Hutchence in one of them. I did really enjoy that one. I love NXS, and I love Michael Hutchence. Rest in peace. But the reference is actually not, even though The Devil Inside is a song that was originally coming up as part of the film and the music, he references Michael Hutchence being up for a part in an Oliver Stone film or something, I think maybe it's Wars film. Anyway, so yeah, even that, even though it came from a song, he ties it back into film.
Yep. So our story starts off as the synopsis mentioned. It's a Halloween night. Our protagonist, at least for the first part of this, Hale, receives a call from his mother, which prompts him and his fellow medical students to go on a journey to the middle of nowhere, location-wise, to essentially check on his mother. And they are very quickly trapped by an early Halloween winter storm, where things kind of start to go awry for them.
Oh, so here's where this is going to get interesting. We want to talk about the plot, not necessarily the structure of the novel.
I think we can kind of dip back and forth. We might have to dip back and forth a little bit.
So, yes, basically, like these young adults end up at this house because their friend Hale is worried about his mom. But when they get there, it's very clear that there are some monsters around that may or may not be out to kill them. And it's kind of a matter of like trying to figure out what's happening in the house, where is the mom, and why is Hale in the house so haunted?
Yeah, and so it doesn't take long once they get to the house for this to kick into full-on like horror movie mode, where like the storm, like you said, kind of is a way of keeping them there while things are going down and stuff.
It does all the fun stuff where, you have a slutty girl there who's got like only a bra on, and she's partnered up with a guy, and there's some sexual tension there. And then you have the real like drama happening between Nona and Hale, because like they're kind of quasi boyfriend and girlfriend, and she's trying to figure out what's wrong with him. So that's where you get the real actual storyline happening. But all the cliche horror things are still going on, where if somebody's naked, they're going to die first, and the story tells you like it's falling into all of the classic horror themes, and that's part of the fun. Like you're here to see and witness a slasher film, even though there's technically a bigger story going on, and it's going to hook you so that you want to go to the sequel, which is coming very quickly in the novel.
It's probably a good time to address a couple of things. So this came out post-Scream and acknowledges Scream as an entity, but this was maybe it was the first book to do that, though, to kind of acknowledge its own, like its own horror style, like all the tropes of horror, like its own self-referencing book, so to speak.
Yeah, I do think it's like the Cabin in the Woods before there was a Cabin in the Woods.
Well, nowadays, and I think that's why it's important to mention it, because there are so many TV shows and movies that have done this at this point. I don't know how many books there are, but I have to imagine this was pretty early, at least for a book to do that.
Absolutely. And this is where, like, if we're talking about the structure versus the plot. So I think to move forward with the plot, so you have like almost a classic, like first episode or first in a series, in a trilogy. The first movie happens and it's just confined to a house, and you're getting to know like the Jason Voorhees story. Like there's some kind of a demonic presence and you don't know what it is. And then, there's some kind of family dynamic and you don't know what it is, but you know who survived at the end. And then the sequel happens and it's like you're seeing echoes of these people, but you're in a totally different setting.
This may be where we might have to spoiler talk, cut you off. I don't know how much of that we're going to do. No, I don't know. I have to, Rob, is it too much?
Being careful about, we won't talk about who does or who doesn't, but the characters do bleed from one, like in the trilogy from movie 1 to movie 2 to movie 3. You do have some characters that bleed from one to the next. Mm-hmm. But and over time you're figuring out the original mythology of where this haunting is coming from. But Stephen puts it in different settings in each of the movies to try and add some flavor to it and keep the audience interested. And so it's really doing a lot of things all at once.
Yeah, I don't think anything was spoiled by that. And I mean, you have to talk about the fact that there's a second and a third part at some point, right?
Sure. And I think that it's important to, how do I say this? They're very distinct stories. Not that they're not dependent on one another, but it's not just a continuation of the same story. So, I can go back to Halloween 1 and 2. Just two picks up the moment one ends and then moves oddly enough to a hospital, where the second story, plays out. But they literally, you could have watched the two of them together in one sitting. They could have just been one long movie. It wouldn't be weird. These are three very distinctly different stories that all take place and all have, the same basis, then the same, characters. I'm kind of shuffling my head around because I don't even know if that's the right word. But yeah, they are told very differently, I think.
As Misty just texted to me, this is a very difficult book to talk about without spoiling things. What I would like to say is the Hale character we mentioned earlier. One thing that is important to the entire book in three parts is like a tragedy that happened in his past, and I don't think that we would be spoiling anything to talk about that, right?
Yep.
So as a kid, when this Hale kid was like 12. First of all, I can't. This is the first book probably ever where I've read about people riding on three-wheelers, and it took me because they don't exist. You can't find three-wheelers anywhere.
Yeah.
But it took me back in time to like a childhood where three-wheelers existed, and it just I liked that so much. Anyway, so that's a little personal indulgence for me. But he's got his younger daughter Jenny on the back of his
sister.
Did I say daughter again? Man, I can't get over this. Anyway, he's got his younger sister Jenny on the back, riding on his three-wheeler with him, and something goes wrong, and she gets kind of wrenched into the works and really messes up her legs and stuff like that. And that was because of that incident, things in their family kind of set off on a really dark path. And so this comes out in the first part. I don't think that the other people knew about that before they got to the house, right? This is something that kind of comes to life when they're at the house. And so as they're dealing with what the hell is going on, they also have to face the fact of oh, well, this guy may, is obviously not telling us everything. And now his intentions are brought into question and stuff too. So, but that's a very fundamental part of the overall story, is the fact that Jenny got crippled in a three-wheeler accident, and I love so much that it was a three-wheeler.
Yeah.
Rob was just trying to figure out where the smart guy was that thought we'll just add another wheel and make these a lot safer. Yeah.
We're saving so much on that one wheel per vehicle thing.
Oh, good Lord. There may be some other things we discussed from the story, but that's the basics, and you just have to let this one kind of unroll on its own. Now, in the event that you find our final review interesting enough that you want to read this, let me make a very strong suggestion to you. It will be very, very tempting. I did it from a time constraint because I was warned about the possibility that this might not work out well, but this book is not currently in print. So you can purchase a used copy, and you can purchase a digital copy. I was really excited that I purchased a digital copy because that was the only way I'd have it in time. But because of the footnotes, I was warned. But I was like, well, this isn't bad because every footnote has a hyperlink that then has it pop up on the screen. So you can read the footnote and then you can just exit out and you can go back to reading, which wasn't ideal, but it worked. The problem is the same thing doesn't happen for is it sub footnotes? Is that the right term?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. That doesn't happen for the sub footnotes, which maybe by and large doesn't matter, because I found the footnotes, although an interesting touch at times, very often didn't matter. And I kind of mentioned earlier, Steve and I are the same age. So a lot of the references he was making, even if, let's say you're 15 or 20 and reading this book, you might not get. I got to the point where I could almost predict exactly what the footnote was going to say in a lot of cases. So there is some information in the sub footnotes that will completely detract from your ability to understand the entirety of this story. So here's what I will say. First of all, I found out that Stephen gets no money from the digital sales of this book, so that's one good reason not to buy it. The other good reason is you will be left confused and have to have friends who read the paper copy explain it to you for 20 minutes like I did much earlier this evening. Which is not an ideal way to read a book, especially if, reading is not for me and Rob. It's not a solitary thing for us anymore because we get to talk about them. But the average person reads a book and doesn't have anyone to talk to about it. So don't buy the digital copy. If you do decide you want to read this, you definitely want the paper version, and that's probably the second time I've said that in 423 episodes. So that's how strongly I feel about it.
So if anybody wants to just take a quick jump over to, and this is in no way an advertisement, abebooks.com, you can get copies of Demon Theory for as little as like under $4 if you're not looking for like a first edition or a signed copy or something like that. You can get like a legit paper copy of the book for not a lot of money. So even though this is an out of print book, it's definitely easy to come by, and it's not going to like destroy your pocketbook.
No, and actually I think this is a great opportunity, just jumping off of exactly what Livia said. This is one of those books which is very similar to a lot of the postmodern like drive to encourage the experimentation with the novel itself, like structuralization of novels, and do they have to be read in a linear fashion, or can you get creative with that? And so, of course, House of Leaves is the one we all know, but it's not the only one. And I feel like Stephen did this also to contribute to that conversation and to that experimentation for writers who are able to mess with the structure of a novel. That's what this is for. It's to play with that. And I don't think it's accessible in a digital form. You really need the written book. And I love him for that, because I think we can all agree that, yeah, it's nice to carry as many books as you want on your handheld device. That is a beautiful thing. I never want to lose that. I also love the smell and the feel of an actual book in my hands. And when people put out novels like this, it forces the physical book to stay alive. And I appreciate that.
That's a good point.
I rolled my eyes so hard at that feel and smell of a book thing that I think I hurt myself.
That actually, I'm going to take a little detour here, but that brings to mind several years ago now, me and Livius went to the release of Daniel Lusky's The Familiar Part 1 in Chicago, and he did some Q&A and stuff, and the ebook version of The 50-Year Sword came up at one point, and the conversation basically was about how on the iPad it's phenomenal, and on any other digital device it's basically just a PDF. And he was very apologetic about how like it didn't end up being the way he wanted it. And in my mind I was like, dude, if he gets discouraged from like pushing the boundaries of what you can do with a book, that's going to be very bad, because like he's so good at challenging what, you know, the typical layout and structure of a book is, that if I was like, I wanted to go up and hug him and be like, dude, no, please just keep doing these things. Like, we need to have these things, because this is the only way that the, you know, the electronic version of a book is going to evolve. So in a moment of panic where I was like, please, dude, keep doing it. Just so back to talking about Demon Theory a little bit. Something I want to acknowledge, we're at the point now where like spoilers are a very real thing. The good news is there's going to be a ton of spoiler talk about this, so like if you want to dig deeper into like the story and what goes on, we did that conversation for you. But I want to acknowledge the fact that this book is in 3 separate distinct parts. There's Demon Theory 16, 17, and 18. It's 3 parts. It's supposed to be like a movie trilogy, and so the plot that we've given you is as much as we can about the first part, but there is a second and a third part, and each of them are their own like self-contained story. Then they build together to be like an overall trilogy. So for the sake of spoilers, like, you know, the things that happen in part 2 may really kind of reveal stuff that happened in part 1, so we're not going to talk about it, but it is 3 distinct separate stories in one book.
Yeah, for sure. And it's tough to talk around these things. So just trust that Rob went out of his way to say that. And there are reasons for him saying it, I guess, is probably the best way that I can, you know what I mean? Like, the best way I can explain that. Hey, did you guys catch that he name dropped all the beautiful sinners in this book?
Okay, I have that underlined. I did notice that, and I also noticed that he did not footnote it, and I was like, he didn't even footnote himself.
Yep. which is probably good. I mean, it's a nice little touch.
It is.
I had to Google all the beautiful sinners to see if there is anywhere else that exists.
Oh yeah, like in pop culture or something.
Yeah, like maybe that was originally like the name of, his book was taken from a poem by somebody or whatever, and no, every Google result is for Stephen Graham Jones. Nice. If you Google all the beautiful sinners.
Very cool. Mm-hmm. I feel like we've done good setup, but there's like so much like breadth and depth to the book that we can't talk about because of spoilers. That like there's got to be something more that we have to say about this, like the structure or something like that. There's got to be. Does anybody have
a little bit? Yeah. So I think what we're really missing talking about is just how much this is a hodgepodge and playground for any fan of the horror genre or actually even film, because what Stephen is doing is, like, as he is telling this story, what his footnotes do is give you a background of a reference that's being made in the film. So we go to movies and we see things and they look familiar, and immediately if we notice that it is familiar, something clicks in the brain that says, oh, that's like Lethal Weapon, or oh, that's like Halloween. And this book does that for you. It plants you in there as an audience and does the brain function for you in the footnotes. But it even goes further and tells you all these things that you had no idea were references upon references upon references of when you see someone say check you later in a gas station, that you don't just think of Dazed and Confused. That actually didn't come from Dazed and Confused. That came from this, and this. All these things that you never knew. Stephen puts that on a page so you actually see the depth of reference that can occur in film these days, which I can only imagine if you're someone like Jesse who has that in your catalog, in your brain, that you've seen all these films and you can see all of what led up to this new idea, how rich it is for you as an audience member. He kind of gives you that. So you don't have to have all the references. He's going to tell you about them so that you can experience the same depth that everybody else with that background has. There's something special about it that is hard to explain, but this book gives it to you. If you've ever wanted to sit around and hear horror nerds or film nerds talk, just read this book.
I'd like to go a step farther in talking about the book as a whole and structure. So everything that Misty said is absolutely true. But there's still a story here. And the story is super, super complex. So I've had conversations with Stephen Graham Jones, and I get the feeling this is probably easier for him to put together in his mind than it would be for the average person. But it is a labyrinth of a story. I mean, it is a difficult and complicated story, too. So if that type of thing appeals to you, then absolutely, it's another good reason to read this. So without, giving too much away, there is a lot of things that you should be keeping track of. This is a little bit like, not the story and anything, but a little bit like Sixth Sense, right? Like you watch Sixth Sense and you go, well, shit, I got to watch it all again now. Yeah. And see what kind of stuff I can catch. I will probably not be reading it again. But that being said, this book would definitely benefit from a second reading and probably become, I don't want to say a less complicated story, but a little easier to follow once the whole story has been laid out.
I actually was, before you referenced The Sixth Sense, when I heard where you were going, the first thing I thought of is that, oh my goodness, yes, the story itself has several oh shit moments. Just like The Sixth Sense, where you're like, oh shit, I didn't see that coming. Yep. And so I appreciate you for pointing that out. It's true. It's not just the structure that is so rich. The story itself has something as well. It really is dense, is probably the best way to describe it. It is, that's why I said, you guys are taking a bite into this. It is a dense book. There is a lot happening. It is very rich and amazing.
So I'm going to pose a question to the two of you, and I'm gonna try and be very careful about the way I ask this. Having read this book and then read his more recent works, which I guess we could all probably agree that they're less complicated. Do you think that the fact that, you know, his more recent books are more accessible takes away anything, or do you still see everything from Demon Theory in these newer books too? Livius.
So, full disclosure, I tried reading All the Beautiful Sinners long before this podcast. Around the times I stumbled onto the works of Craig Clevenger and Will Christopher Baer, and I obviously I don't have a good memory of the 50 pages that I read 10 years ago or whatever it is. But I felt this was similarly less accessible, similarly to how I felt about All the Beautiful Sinners. His latter books, more recent books, ones we reviewed on this podcast, the couple that I've read not for this podcast, just on my own, have the exact same voice. I feel like if you handed me a book without an author's name on the cover, I could tell you it's Stephen Graham Jones if I was 50 pages in. I think that he has some style markers, quirks, whatever you want to call them, that I could identify as his work. Do I think it takes a little bit I don't know. I'm going to spoil my own review for this. This is not my favorite Stephen Graham Jones book, and not by a long shot. That being said, I appreciate the complexity of the overall story. Sometimes I just don't want to work that hard, I guess. So I will say no. It doesn't take anything away. But like I said, for the person who really wants to dig into something and really work their way through a book and not just read a book and enjoy, beautiful language or great stories that are laid out, I don't want to say simply, but simpler than this, and maybe that's the right way for you.
Misty.
So I may not add a lot to what Livius already said because I agree with some of it, or probably a lot of it. My thing is, I do agree that it is complex, and because of its complexity, can be less accessible to a typical reader. I would not, I don't want to get into my review, just like Livius said about his, so let me not go too far, but it is dense, and it's more of a homework book. You have to be engaged and work with this novel. You cannot idly read it, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that shows you the level of expertise that a writer has. And I think at this point in his career, he was very much still I don't think showing off is the right way to phrase it, but that's what I'm going to call it right now. He shows off in this book. You see the level of wittiness and brilliance and just how much knowledge that this bastard has. I don't know how he has the time to accumulate all of this knowledge. It is impressive. If anything, this is impressive. But I also know that there's a lot of people who may not know about it that would eat this up. People like David James Keaton and Jesse, who this is like a sandbox to them. Like they would just go in and just get so fiendly happy about all of what it does. However, for a typical reader, and for when it comes to selling novels and wanting to make a life as an author, no, this isn't the way. It's not, unfortunately, and I hate that. It reminds me of Arrested Development. All the good shows that are brilliant are not accessible to a wide range audience. And this is almost a novel example. Not of Arrested Development. It's not a comedy, but still that same idea of it's so cerebral that it gets lost on people.
So you guys basically said exactly what I was hoping. Livius's point that this is absolutely Stephen's voice is a fucking incredible point. He has had such a strong definition of himself through everything I've read, and it's unmistakable. And then Misty's point about how he's on full display in this one. That's kind of what I was thinking, because you'll hear the detractors saying it's too it's too complicated, it's too confusing, blah blah blah. But like, it's really just like an amplified version of like other things that you would read. Like it just turns up some of the dials a little bit. So it was one of the intimidating reads from Stephen, was this, because of the complexity of it. But I guess I fall more in the Jesse Lawrence, David James Keaton category, where like this is just candy to me. Like the more complicated, like the more it challenges me to like understand, the more I'm like, I can fucking do this, and I like dive into it.
Love it.
Yeah.
I feel what we're creating here, though, through this conversation, for anybody who does want to read it, though, is maybe the thing. And I didn't have a dust jacket, and quite honestly, I didn't read I did read the synopsis, but it's almost a primer for knowing that you're going to have to pay a lot of attention. If that makes sense. I read every book, I pay attention, right? But I don't start. We didn't talk about this. This came up a little bit in Spoiler Talk, which we recorded before the episode. So head over and listen to that after you're done listening to this. There are a lot of characters, and a lot of things happen to those characters. So being forearmed with the knowledge that you're going to have to maintain a mental database of exactly who these 6, 7, 8 to start characters are, and then really focus on who they are and pay attention to that when you move into part 2. You know what I mean? Like the primer would have been helpful. I don't know how much of that is the responsibility of an author or a publisher to give you. Probably zero. That would have helped, I think, for me at least, and probably I read a lot of the reviews for the digital copy, and there are 2 types of people. So I'm going to say there are the Rob and Misties, because I feel like you 2 are going in one direction, and there are the me that suffered a little bit reading this book. Now, the digital version didn't help, so I will say that actually hindered the experience. I'm going to try to take that into consideration a little bit in my wrap-up. But at least I feel that if it's not the author's responsibility to give you that primer, I hope that we're able to do that for you here if you decide to read this book.
Sounds like we're getting real close to wrap-ups.
It does sound that way, and I am going to, unless you guys have anything else to add, I would like to go first.
Please.
So, I like a lot of Stephen Graham Jones stuff. I mentioned The Night Cyclist is one of my favorite novellas, at least in the top 3 probably novellas I've ever read. The Least of My Scars, goddamn brilliant. Lots of good stuff there. This one struggled with, so I'm going to blame digital for a little bit of that. I literally had to have them explain the end of the book to me because there was a formatting issue, we'll call it, that did not allow the book to give that information to me because I thought I was done. I thought I read the entire book. And really, I didn't. I liked the complexity of the story. And after sitting down and talking to my fellow co-hosts, I like the story a little more than I did when I was done reading it. That being said, it was still super hard to follow for me throughout the course of the book. And I'm not going to elaborate as to why. These are things you're going to have to discover on your own. But hopefully what I said earlier about paying a lot of attention and maybe taking notes while you're doing it is not the worst idea. So it was kind of messy. Some of that I can blame on digital. Some of it I'm going to blame on Stephen, quite honestly. Overall, I think that it was super ambitious, and the big picture stuff is really, really, really brilliant. The way to get there was a little more convoluted than I like for my taste. So I'm going to end this review, mute myself for the next 10 minutes, and not barge in on anybody else's review, and I'm going to give this 3 stars.
Ooh.
All right, Misty, are you ready?
Yeah,
or should I? You ready?
No, I'm fine. Yeah.
Go for it.
No, I do want you to go last. I don't want to know what both of you say before I say. So leading up, especially if you listen to the spoiler talk, it is no secret that Stephen Graham Jones is in my heart. Like, as far as writers go and pivotal ones at that, he is in my all-time top 5, if not top 3. He's just amazing as a human, and I do bring that with me every time I read one of his books. And this was no stranger to that idea, even back in 2006. So I acknowledge that I am a bit biased. However, I love that Livius called this ambitious, because that's exactly what this is. I acknowledge this as part of the postmodern conversation, and I have not been in school in college since 2004, so I don't want any lit crit or lit theory people coming at me for calling it postmodern when it's not really postmodern anymore. I don't know if it's post or there's a new word, but it's part of the conversation of the structure of the novel, and he did an amazing job with it, and he also had fun. If you know Stephen at all, he is obsessed with horror. That's one of his favorite things. He doesn't always write horror, but on a personal level, this is where he has fun, and that's exactly what he does in this book, is he has fun, and he shows you just how brilliant and how dense his knowledge is and what he can do with it. The only thing this book lacks that I feel takes away from his talent is you won't see how much he can play with sentences and how beautiful his writing can be. That is the only thing missing from this. There are sentences in some of his novels that, to me, can be put up on a chalkboard and just admired. And Demon Theory doesn't bring that part of him to me, but it doesn't make it lacking in and of itself, because horror does sometimes lack that. But it is a playful sandbox of horror reference. It is an amazing story, thick with mythology, and it turns on itself, and it's very clever and tongue-in-cheek, and it's a great time. And it's very nostalgic for me, being that it's 12 years since I read it the first time, and I am still going to give it 5 stars, even though it doesn't have beautiful sentences in it. Being what it is, this dense, difficult read, I love what it brings to the novel. I love what it brings to horror. I love how much it makes me work to get to the nut of the story. And so 5 stars all day.
All day. I like that you said all day.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, yeah, I'm kind of a Stephen Graham Jones fanboy, just like Missy was talking about. More new to the game, like when we started the podcast in 2011, I had not read anything by Stephen Graham Jones, and it wasn't for another year or two till we started. So I'm not the, decades-old reader of Stephen Graham Jones, but everything that we've read for the podcast I've absolutely been delighted by, and he's just a great person in general, and talking to him and understanding what he writes and why, and the passions that he has for the topics that he writes about and stuff really informs. It buys a lot of goodwill for me getting through what was supposed to be, kind of a complex book. And so I'm looking at it from a very kind of biased opinion, like Missy had mentioned. And so, all that said, the book is confusing, in a way that, I wasn't really prepared for, and what Livia said about, how you could, if you're reading this for the first time, how you could help yourself track it better is that's where I was confused. But at the same time, I know it's not a lazy author writing lazily. I know it's an author who did something intentionally for the sake of the story, or at the very least for a fun what if, which is something that I think is very characteristic of Stephen Graham Jones in a very positive way. Like you talk to him about something, and I've heard interviews, I've done interviews with him where something was, it seemed like it was very, intelligently done, and his answer would be so simple and just like, I just wondered what would happen, or whatever. And obviously that's not an exact example, but that's what I like about Stephen. He writes so intelligently, and he has such a good approach at the craft, but at the same time, like, something could have just been an indulgence, and that is absolutely just as valid as if he, really, really put a lot of work into it. Either way, his stories are always deep and charming, and it's always obvious that what he writes is a love letter to whatever it is. And I feel like this, especially with the footnotes put that on full display. Like Stephen is obviously very passionate about horror and all of the elements that he's, been inspired by or curious about throughout the years are just packed into this 440 pages. So for me, I'm just charmed by the whole project and the fact that it was confusing and a little more difficult to get through didn't really hold me back from really enjoying the book. The stuff at the end was very, very satisfying, and I'm not going to say what it is, but very satisfying for me. And overall, just I freaking loved it. I loved it, and I'm going to do it 5 stars as well.
Yes!
Misty always thinks it's like a contest. You ever notice that? Anybody matches her rating, she's very, very happy about that.
Well, she's a competitive person in general, so.
I need, Livius, all this says about me is I need validation. That's really what it is.
I mean, I'm glad you brought it up, so let's talk about that for a minute. Misty did, off the air, recommend to me not to try reading All the Beautiful Sinners again, based on our conversation about this book, which I appreciate, and it's been in the back of my mind that I should go back. Maybe I was in the wrong place. Maybe I was distracted. So I don't know. Maybe I'll put that on my things to do list for 2019 is to read All the Beautiful Sinners. Yeah, if you want something that's going to twist your brain into mush and or maybe just challenge you as a person, pick this up. But get a goddamn paper copy, for fuck's sake. Really, Don't do what I did. Don't do what I did. Don't do what I did.
Don't do it. Well, that's our general advice is don't do what Livius does.
So I'm going to simplify this for the readers. I missed the ending of / the most critical part of the goddamn book. That's how bad the digital copy is.
Yeah.
Hashtag truth.
I'm going to break in with a key page update, Livius.
Oh, well, this one should put us, where do we at, 28,000 now?
Wait. I think you're a little
12,000 pages? Okay.
So the goal this year was to break 10,000 pages, and with this book, we are at 10,016 pages. So this pushes 16 pages over the goal for the year, and it is, the second week of December? So there's a little time left.
We're going to get one more in this year.
Yeah. So very excited about that. This is our 32nd book that we've read for the podcast, which is very exciting in 2018. So we're going to dip it up to 33.
Mm-hmm.
For the year.
Want to definitely thank Misty for being a very loyal and sweet patron on our Patreon account, patreon.com/booked. As part of the tier that she is in, she gets to pick one book a year, although if Misty were to just drop a message saying she wanted to read another book, we'd probably do that anyway. But thank you, Misty, so much for all you've contributed to the podcast. And now as a permanent co-host, too, we get to put you to work like 3 or 4 extra times a year, too.
I would be lying if I didn't tell you it was thrilling. I would thank you, but you're doing me a favor. So I love you guys.
That's right. Everyone remember, when you contribute to our Patreon, we're doing you a favor. As a patron just told you.
Yeah, it's so. Misty's word. That's what she said.
Let us do more for you by going to patreon.com/booked and dropping at least $1 a month.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about what's on the horizon, Livius?
For sure. I'm going to talk about 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
First, because that's going to be the next and last book that we do for 2018, and that's going to be Adrenaline Junkie. We talked about it here on the podcast. Les Edgerton, longtime friend of the podcast. We should probably get in communication with him and see if he'd like to join us at some point. Maybe we'll have to do that in January, though. I don't know the time-wise we can get that in. But I mentioned that because Misty gets back-to-back episodes, as she will be on our Holiday Office Party Part 2 in just like a week. It's going to be a week from tonight, actually. So the 16th we'll be doing live via Facebook, I believe, because that worked out pretty well last time. Keep an eye out on the Booked Podcast Facebook page and the Book Podcast listening group for links to that. That will be a video episode, which you'll be able to hear here. You'll be able to hear wherever you're hearing this, but you won't do it with a picture. So it would behoove you to be around live on Sunday, the 16th at 7-ish, 7:30, whatever time we decide on for that. So you can see it as it's happening, but it will live possibly forever. on our Facebook page, unlike that one episode that we had tragic mishap with that went away. So that one you only saw live. So there's always that
Russian hackers. It was the Russian hackers.
It was definitely Russian hackers. So
I don't want to be the guy that corrects you, but I'm gonna be the guy that corrects you. I think this is our third holiday office party.
Oh,
Pretty
maybe
sure
I was so
third year.
maybe I was so inebriated during the last one I don't remember it.
Yeah, because there was definitely one. One of them was so long that we had to break it up into 2 parts, and I think another one was just 1 episode. So I'm pretty sure this is our third year doing that.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I have a bottle of eggnog sitting in the refrigerator.
Not
for next
chocolate wine?
No, I could get chocolate wine. I could totally go get chocolate wine. But for this one, eggnog. It's Christmas. I figured I would really do it up this time.
You gonna put some liquor in there, or is it already in there?
It is pre-liquored.
Nice.
So I don't remember the name of the company. I'm sure that the bottle will just sit on the desk next to me the whole time, and I'll drunkenly hold it up occasionally during next week's episode.
I'm gonna have to dig out. Remember, I had that light that was like putting snowflakes up on the wall behind me. I'm gonna have to find that.
Yeah, you should definitely find that. I agree.
Yeah. Gifts. I think the gift exchange is going to happen. Gifts are flying all over the universe right now. I'm just very excited. I'm very excited about the holiday office party. It's like the best time of year.
It's the most wonderful time of the year.
It is. I didn't want to like a lawsuit or something against us. So yeah.
So definitely come back next week, but not here. Come to our Facebook page where we'll be having the office party part 2.5, 3, whatever number it is. And until then, on behalf of Misty Bennett, this is Livius Nedden.
And I'm Rob Olson. Keep reading.